The Wii was home to a lot of shovelware and overall just throwaway games. Sure, there were many hidden gems to be found amongst the bargain bins, but you really had to look to find them. The Wii had a ton of great games, don't get me wrong, but for every Mario Galaxy or Kirby's Return to Dreamland, you have to put up with the multiple chicken shoot type games too, you know? However, luckily for me, I was able to find just one gem that really stuck with me even to this day, which brings us to the second game I have wanted to discuss from my local library pickups in my childhood. Lost in Shadow, a game developed by the studio Hudson Soft, most famous for their work in the Mario Party series, is an enjoyable puzzle platformer game that I feel like is hardly known. I am willing to bet that nobody watching this video has even heard of the game. To touch a bit on this game's history, Lost in Shadow was developed by a team at Hudson Soft that had previously made the game Kororimpa, a puzzle game for the Wii, which also had a sequel made by that same team. That game was a puzzle game similar to the marble game Labyrinth. It's a neat little time waster puzzle game, and I do quite enjoy it, but to say that Lost in Shadow is a pretty huge departure from that previous work would be an understatement. Lost in Shadow has puzzle elements. In fact, sometimes it has some really fun puzzle mechanics to work with using the shadows, but for the rest of the game, its atmosphere, platforming, combat, yeah, this is its own beast. Lost in Shadow was first unveiled to the public at E3 in 2010, Konami's presentation at said event. The game did not seem to grab anybody's attention, and game journalists especially did not attach to this game in any way. The game got really poor reception critically. The game's critical score on Metacritic 6 out of 68. That's only 37% positive, with 55% being mixed and 8% being negative. Sure, that negative percentage is low, but half of it is mixed, so clearly this game was viewed as mid. However, the game's user score on Metacritic sits in at 8.9, that being 85% positive and 15% mixed. So clearly, there are plenty of gamers out there that really enjoyed this game, and I am one of them. So we have a game that didn't triumph critically, but remains an enjoyable experience for most that have played it. Ladies and gentlemen, a hidden gem. But I may need to justify that claim for you, but before I get into it, I did want to note, however, that IGN gave the game an 8.5, so for the first time in a long time, frankly, I actually can slightly agree with IGN. The game first released in Japan in July of 2010 as Kage no To, or Tower of Shadows, in October of 2010 in Australia and Europe as A Shadow's Tale, and finally in North America as Lost in Shadow in January of 2011. Man, North America got the worst title, huh? Originally the game was going to be named Tower of Shadow in North America, but they changed it. Why? I don't know, because honestly Tower of Shadow is a much better name that fits the game narrative way better. Lost in Shadow is a 2D action platformer, but not quite. What's unique about this game is it takes a mostly 3D environment and makes a 2D environment out of it, using the shadows of objects on the 3D plane. It's an incredibly novel idea that works really well, and I'd say it's quite impressive for the Wii game. Sure, graphically the game is nothing crazy, but making a game engine that uses the shadows of objects, obstacles, and traps is some really good work. The game mechanic that best complements this shadow engine is the ability to manipulate the 3D objects, and sometimes even the lighting itself. You can move objects to gain differing platforms to move across, and also move light bulbs back and forth, up and down, in order to achieve differing angles of these shadows. It feels like you're really getting to play with the 2D environment, and that's all done by actually moving things in the 3D one. It truly is an intuitive engine, and it's something I haven't seen in any other games that I have played personally. The game follows a level structure. Your objective initially is to get inside this giant tower and climb up its many floors. Each floor is essentially its own level. When traversing these levels, you will encounter many obstacles, small platforming sections, puzzles, traps, and an array of enemies which I'll touch more on later. Going throughout these floors, you will need to find these objects called monitor eyes. By collecting all 3 on a given floor, you will then be able to progress to the next floor. Sometimes to get these monitor eyes, you will need to do some back and forth between floors, meaning you may find a monitor eye early on that needs something else to be done before being able to go back and grab it. This means that some of these floors can be quite elaborate with everything you have to go find and do in order to grab each eye. As you traverse the floors, you may find these sparkling bits. These are memories. Picking these up will increase your health, referred to as your shadow's weight. I'll explain more about the memories later, so remember these for now. Traps, general hazards, and enemies will be obstacles in your path. Traps can sometimes be manipulated just like the rest of the shadows. For example, maybe an arrow shooter can be blocked off by pulling the other shadows in front of it. General hazards may include pits where there is no shadow to stand on, as well as spikes, or being crushed between 2 shadows. And then there's the enemies. These enemies are purely shadow and do not exist in the 3D environment. To fend off said enemies, you will find a sword early on. on. Most enemies at the start will take a few hits to take down, like the first enemies you encounter, the spiders. When defeating enemies, you can gain back some health and also experience. Gaining experience will allow you to level up over time. When leveling, you'll be able to do more damage to enemies. However, enemies level up as well. The different enemy types will become more evolved and of course stronger over time. There are also larger versions of some enemy types that are far stronger to boot. There's also these blue-eyed enemies that can only be defeated by environmental hazards, like arrow shooters for example. Some enemies can be extremely dangerous and kill you in only a couple hits. Take this giant mechanical enemy for example. Get hit only 2 or 3 times and you're probably gone. However, defeating these giant guys will return nearly all of your lost health, so getting in there and finishing them off will not leave you gasping for air. Another obstacle you may encounter are these shadowy gates. These gates will lead you into a shadow corridor. These corridors present you with some shorter platforming and puzzle challenges to complete. You mainly just need to make it to the end where you'll find an exit gate, which will return you back to the floor you're on. These shadow corridors are nothing too hard, but will sometimes take some time to complete, and some even may take a bit of trial and error to figure out. All in all, they're a nice break from the usual levels, and there's typically only 1 or 2 of these per floor. Now let's get to these things. These will elude you for a while. You won't really know what these things are. That is until you gain a brand new sword about halfway in. Once you gain that, you can now use these gates to traverse into the 3D environment for a time. Your time is heavily limited here, but there are sometimes these wells of light that extend the time a little while. This opens up for even more puzzle opportunities, as well as finding memories that were previously unreachable in past levels. I love this mechanic. It connects the 2 environments even more. Overall, I think the game's mechanics work very well. Sometimes these levels can be very elaborate and even tedious to traverse back and forth through, but overall the level design is good. And also, I want to take a moment to speak about the game's atmosphere. It's dark, but also strangely beautiful. Every section of this towering structure brings its own mood, and the music also complements that. The music is not very moving, but rather still. Not complex, but simple. This enforces the dark setting and also conveys a sense of loneliness. There's practically no living thing in this tower, and the game's environments along with the music really complements that idea. Lost in Shadow is a somber game, and the mechanics, atmosphere, and moment-to-moment gameplay makes you feel it. To say this game has a story is an overstatement. It has an overarching narrative, yes, something that motivates you to keep climbing, but it starts off simple. We begin at the top of the tower. A boy whose shadow is separated from his body by some cloaked figure. His shadow tossed from the top of the tower down to the surface below the clouds. The boy meets an odd little figure, a fairy of some type called Spangle. Figuring that the only way to gain his body back is to get back to the top, he begins to traverse the terrain and make his way to the tower. This is the motivation for the majority of your playthrough. Get your body back. But how that journey unfolds and the secrets found throughout the journey reveals something deeper. The memories you collect throughout the tower will begin to reveal what's going on. Shadow, that is all that I have become. If I climb that tower, maybe I can get my body back. At least I hope so. I suppose the only reason for me being here is to fade away. What is this tower anyway? Who built it? And for what purpose? Some of these memories, however, give no details. Some will just say, too blurry to read. This is where I start to see some cracks, which I will elaborate on more in a little while, but for now, remember the fact that not all memories reveal anything of note. Floor after floor you climb, going through various sections of the tower, like the factory and residential area. I love these environments, especially the residential. This really tells me that people once lived here, and the game actually reveals this as well during a short cutscene that also gives some narrative detail. Between certain areas in the tower, these cutscenes will play, giving some context while still being quite mysterious. It appears other shadows have been here before me. Maybe hiding and waiting for the end isn't such a bad idea after all, but that wouldn't solve anything. Something doesn't feel right. It's not safe up ahead. A giant monster awaits in the corridor. If you touch it, you will disappear. Just a touch and you're gone. A giant shadow soul, a monster made of nothing but shadows. The nasty monster is gone. I managed to escape it, at least for now. Here is the threat. Here is what drives everything. This monster made of shadows torments the tower, consuming everything in its wake. Gaining your body back is not your only task. Your other task is this: survive. and defeat the Shadow Soul. Am I really safe, or will it come out of nowhere and eat me? If I don't defeat the Shadow Soul, I'll never get out of here. I'll never get my body back. But how can I defeat something like that? Further up into the tower, and there's only more questions than answers, it seems. But as you go forwards, memories start to reveal a shocking truth. Each time we fade away, we leave behind a fragment of our soul. Our body fades away, everything becomes cold, nothing can be seen. Our memory is disseminated in every possible way, scattered around this tower, like fuel for the one that is to come after us. We are expendable. You are not the first shadow to climb the tower. What makes this more obvious? When you die in the game over screen will refer to you as boy number blank. Numerous times, shadows of a boy have traversed through the tower, and they've all met the same fate, and left their memories behind for the next shadow. A living shadow, the shadow cut from the body of a living person. The shadow of a human child cut from his body and dropped off the tower, over and over again. They thought that eventually one of the shadows would make it up the tower and could defeat the Shadow Soul, but so far all of them have failed. All the shadows eaten. The giant monster made of shadows. This tower is done for. Nearing the top of the tower in the shrine section, obtaining your body back is within your reach, it seems, until you find that your body is nowhere to be found at the top. But on your way here, you found a piece of stained glass, and at the top, a slot for more stained glass pieces to be placed. Now your task shifts. Find these pieces of stained glass. You have to track back to past sections of the tower to find these pieces in the real world using the body of light. Now, the game tells you what floor each stained glass piece is on, which at first seemed a bit too easy. However, you still have to go back and actually find where on the floor it's located, so this task isn't as easy as it first seems, especially considering one of the stained glass shards is in a brand new section that was once inaccessible. The sewers. By using an elevator system that was once inaccessible, you can now go between floors that have an elevator, including the sewers. The backtracking isn't as tedious as I thought it was going to be, and was actually nice to be able to find some memories that were once inaccessible as well, now that you can use the gates to move in the 3D environments with the body of light. Make your way back through all the past sections, plus the sewers, and find all of the stained glass pieces before returning to the top of the tower, slot them in, and something strange happens right before your eyes. A new tower, made of the very shadow of the tower you have been traversing, emerges from the clouds, and before you stands a gate into the shadowy structure that emerged. Here we have the Dark Tower, a realm of darkness filled with challenges to overcome in its 10 floors. These floors can be tricky, and they will put every bit of knowledge of the game's mechanics that you've learned to that point. Nothing here is unbeatable, but it will definitely take some time to traverse. Reach the 9th floor and you're greeted once again by the Shadow Soul. A race to the top of this dark tower is on. Only 2 floors stand in your way to the top, but what will be found there? Escape the clutches of the Shadow Soul and use the gate at the top to enter the real world with the body of light, and you're meted with a quite cryptic scene. The The monster is sealed away by Spangle, taking your current body with it. It's now found that Spangle works with the figure that separated you from your body. This is all according to plan, like I expected. The use of the boy's shadows continuously over and over, and this is solidified by what comes next. Welcome to the Garden Labyrinth, where your final task is met. Once again, you are a shadow, a new shadow separated from the boy's body. Memories found in the garden solidify the idea of the expendability of shadows once again. If a shadow dies, nobody cares. Even if the shadows of the dead join together, it changes nothing. Here in the garden, you will find the shadow cutter, seeming to be the same blade used by the figure that separated your shadow from your real body. Intriguing. The garden also tells another story within the memories. No shadow before you has been able to escape, and seemingly the only way to do so would be to defeat the Shadow Soul, requiring as many memories as possible being the only way. We were unable to escape this tower. We looked all over, but there was no exit. Here we thought that we were so close, but it's all over. Everything is over. Bring our memories along with you. Find as many as you can. You need to weigh at least 21G. This is where I as a player was forced with a dilemma. In the garden, you power a light source, which points down into this well you come across at the end. You can jump down to the well, which seems to be the final section, but you might not shake that feeling from the last memory in the game. I, not really wanting to go back and backtrack at that moment, was curious what would happen if I just tried to beat the game without reaching that threshold, so I jumped in. A battle against the Shadow Soul ensues at the bottom of this well. This seems to be where Spangle sealed it away. By weakening the Shadow Soul and opening up the well to allow the great light to pierce it, you can defeat the Shadow Soul entirely. This battle is nothing special, you basically just need to survive its attacks and get enough hits to weaken it, open up this gate, so you can open the door of the well. Simple enough, but can be challenging if you get hit too much, along with its super strong attack after being hit by the light, which sucks a lot of health away from you if you're too close to it. Do this cycle a few times and you'll prevail. After such success, the figure takes your shadow with your real body in hand. The boy now wakes up in his real body. Nobody else is around, however, and the boy heads toward the open door with light piercing through into the room. Roll credits. Well, I gotta say, the game's Wait, hold on. I didn't reach that 21 gram weight threshold. Was the boy supposed to win and get his body back despite that? And the end credits scene? Wait, how many more identical towers are there? Does each of these towers have its own Shadow Soul defeat? I'm very confused. I looked up the game's ending at 100% completion on YouTube, and the ending is the same. I have to ask this question now. Was this game released in an unfinished state? This would explain how some memories have nothing to add to the context. They just say too blurry to read, and this on top of the fact that a memory says you need a certain weight reached, but in the end that doesn't even matter to the outcome. Maybe an alternate ending was planned. Maybe every memory was planned to have more text. Maybe this game was released before the developers wanted it to be. I did some research online. I searched around. I couldn't find any details about this at all. Well, regardless of all of that, I want to give my final thoughts on this narrative. This game continues to leave you with more questions than it does answers. Who are the rulers of this tower really? If Spangle could seal away the Shadow Soul so easily, why did she wait till the Dark Tower to do so? Could she not seal it away in any other place? If the stained glass pieces were found in the real world, how come a real person couldn't go get them, summon the Dark Tower, and then send a shadow into the Dark Tower? But the Shadow Soul also had a physical body at the top of the Dark Tower, so perhaps the Shadow Soul can consume real humans too? What about all the identical towers at the end? It's quite confusing. However, let me ask this question. Does all that matter in the grand scheme of the game? Perhaps the atmosphere and gameplay is what matters more than the narrative that is trying to tie that all together. Is this game even good? Am I just nostalgia blind? Well, no, I don't think so. Other players like it, just like the user score reflects. I think Lost in Shadow is a great game. Is it a masterpiece? No. But it stands out from other games in its supposed class of games. Sadly, this game was not a huge success, and later Hudson Soft would be shut down and merged with Konami Digital Entertainment in March of 2012. Not necessarily because of Lost in Shadow, but it is sad to see that some of their last titles did not meet as much success as they might have hoped, especially being as good as it is. I think Hudson Soft was a great studio that put out some amazing titles. I mean, they're the studio behind the Mario Party series, Mario Party 8 being the last title in the series that the studio developed, and it's a shame that Mario Party went so downhill with the new studio that came after Hudson's closing. So Lost in Shadow. I truly enjoyed it, both as a kid and as an adult now, looking at it again. I think it seemed more magical when I was younger, but I can't deny that even now the game's shadow engine is quite impressive for the hardware, and it has many novel ideas. I still believe this deserves to be called a hidden gem for the Wii. If you've never checked out this game, but you're intrigued, I'd say go check it out now. Honestly, I'd love to see this game get some kind of remaster or remake of sorts, but that's very unlikely of an action that Konami would take with this game. Well, I hope you've enjoyed this video. I was very excited to make this when the game came back to my memory. I think of all the games I borrowed from the local library back in my childhood, this is the game I remember the most fondly. However, there are still a few more games I want to talk about in this series, so there's more to come for sure. For the next episode of this series, I actually want to shift away from the Wii and take a look at a DS game for a change. So stay tuned for that on the next episode. Can't say when that will be, but I'm hoping it won't be too long. I hope everyone is having a great day, afternoon, or evening. Jash out. Thanks for watching.